Hello everybody, Mark here from Present Day Production. Again, still in isolation, going slightly mad. So today I'm going to be answering your questions. So thank you very much to everyone that sent me questions. We had lots of Facebook messages and Instagram things and carrier pigeons turn up and emails and all kinds of stuff, and that's wonderful. Thank you very much. Love answering your questions, always good fun. If you've got any questions, then please send them, leave them in the comments, get them to us somehow, and we'll do our very best to answer them for you. Let's crack straight on with question number one, which is more of a suggestion than a question, and it's from the wonderful Mark Norton, great sax player, now living in Hamburg. Worked with him many times, known him for many years, lovely guy. Mark says, how about a video on how to make some home recordings sound more live? So if you're at home and you're programming drums and playing in a bass line and stuff like that, how can you get it to sound more live? How can you get it to sound more like a real band and more like a real thing? There's lots of things you can do for that, and we're actually going to do as you've suggested, an entire video on that, where I'm going to program a track and playing a track badly from scratch, just come up with something. What I'm going to try and do is with the drum thing, I'm going to program some drums, and then I'm also going to get a real drummer to play on it. Working on that at the moment, and then I can try and get my programmed drums sounding as close to the real drums as possible, and look at lots of different options for doing lots of different things. There's loads of things you can do to try and get your programmed parts or your MIDI parts to sound more real. So yeah, we're going to do an entire video on that. Thanks very much for the suggestion. That's a great one. So expect a video coming very soon. Thanks, Mark, for that. Next question from Sean Edwards. Sean says, loved the mastering video. What desk are you using? And could you give a more comprehensive run through on what you did with one of the tracks? Thank you, Sean. Yes. To answer the second part of the question, yes, I can do that. We'll do a deep dive video on exactly what I did in terms of everything with a couple of the tracks. I'm not sure which tracks to use. I might use some of the ones from the video. I might use something else. I might see if I can get clearance on a commercial track that I've mastered that you might be a bit more familiar with. And I'll do an in-depth thing. Obviously each track is different, but I'll try and pick some good ones that are informative and show you something that might need fixing. I'll show you a track that might need nothing doing at all to it, which is quite often the case when you're getting sort of mixes through from some real, pro mixers. Quite often I don't need to do anything at all other than prepare them for release and do more of the kind of admin housekeeping kind of stuff. So I'll put that video together. I'm just sort of going through to work out what would be the best kind of tracks to do that with. But thanks for the suggestion on that. To answer the first part of your question, what desk are you using? I'm not actually using a desk at all for mastering. I use this here. Now this is the PreSonus Studio Live 32, which we've had for a couple of years now, and it's absolutely fantastic. So this serves several purposes. This is James's main live mixer. If he's doing gigs with bands, which he quite often does, he'll use one of these as a live mixer. It's a great sounding desk for that. You can pop an SD card in and multi-track to the SD card, so you can record a show really easily. So it gets used for that quite a bit. It also gets used when we're tracking in the studio. So if we've got a band in the live room, musicians in the live room, we've got the PreSonus stage box in there, which is a 24 input, 12 output stage box, which just connects to this with a Cat5 cable that we've run between the rooms. And it means that we can get 32 channels of audio going straight into the computer, which is great. We don't have to worry about connecting ADAT expanders and all that kind of thing. And we can also really easily set up latency-free mixes, monitor mixes for the performers. So headphone mixes, we can have up to 12 completely independent headphone mixes, which can literally be set up in seconds just by doing it on the desk. the musicians can also patch in, if they've got an iPhone or an iPad, you can patch in using the PreSonus app, and you can actually take control of the destiny of your own headphone mix. If you want to, you can literally control every channel using an iPad, and that will only affect your mix. There's also a great app on the phone which just has a more me control, so you can just turn your own volume up. It's just one volume dial on the app, that's all it is, and it just says me, and you can turn yourself up or down. So that's the job it does in the studio and for live work. In terms of mastering, no audio ever goes through this at all. For mastering, I use it entirely as a control surface, so it integrates seamlessly with most DAWs, the PreSonus one, Studio One, obviously, and any DAW that will speak Mackie control language, which is all of them, I think. So we tend to record a lot in Logic, just because myself and James know Logic better than any other DAW, and this controls Logic really well. You can switch it to DAW mode, and you can mix on it just using it as a control surface. Where it's of huge benefit for mastering is that if I'm mastering an album, which I quite often am, and say it's a 16-track album, I could load that 16-track album into a DAW, and I get each song come up on a fader. So one of the first things I want to do when I'm mastering an album is get an idea of the balance for the whole thing. So the respective volumes between each song. There might be one song that's a little bit too loud, one that's a little bit too quiet, and I can really quickly balance the entire album using the faders on the desk, which is great. And I've got transport controls, and I can scroll backwards and forwards through the project and all kinds of other stuff as well. So yes, I do use this for mastering, but only as a control surface. No audio goes through it for mastering at all. The converters in it are great. The input converters are fantastic. The mic preamps and everything are fantastic. The output converters are good, but they're not stunning. They're not as good as mastering grade converters. So I don't use this as an audio device at all for mastering. It just gets used as a control surface. Hope that helps. Hope that answers your question. Thank you very much, Sean. Next question from Adrian Rowe. Adrian asks, what sample rate should I record at? I've just bought a Behringer UMC 404 HD audio interface which records at 192 kilohertz, but I can't really hear any difference between that and 44.1. Well, you won't, Adrian, to be honest, because again, this is something I'm going to do an entire video on, which I'm working on at the moment. It's a bit of a long one, and it's very technical because there are strong arguments for not recording at anything above 48 kilohertz. And if we're doing a session in the studio, I will generally always record at 48 kilohertz. And the reason for that is because there are scientific principles, the Nyquist theorem being one of them, which says that you don't need to record at a sample rate any greater than double the maximum frequency you're trying to capture, which in the case of human hearing is 20 kilohertz. So you go a little bit above that to give aliasing filters a bit of headroom to work and to get their slope in there and stuff like that. But there's really no proven technical reason to record above double the maximum frequency you're trying to capture, and that I'm strongly on that side of the fence with that. A lot of people think there's a lot of myths about sampling rate. A lot of people compare it to, for example, frame rate on film or video. Most film is recorded at 25 frames a second, but you can record at 50 frames a second or 60 or 120, and the more frames you get per second, theoretically the better video or better film you get, because you've got a higher resolution. But again, that argument can fall down artistically. So if you're recording at super high frame rates with super high shutter speeds, you lose if I do that with my hands now, you'll see that the cameras are picking up motion blur. If I pause the video here, you can see that my hands are blurred, and if you're sitting and you take out, we don't have to be sitting, you can stand if you want. If you're sitting or standing or laying down, in fact, if you're in any position, and you take your hand and you do that in front of your face, That's what your eye sees. Your eye actually sees motion blur. So that's the reason why 25 frames a second was kind of chosen back in the day. And we've been making films for over 100 years now, so it's it's pretty much proven. That was the reason that 25 frames a second was chosen, because it's the frame rate that most closely matched what the human eye could see with the technology that was available back in the time. But people analogize that with sample rate. So they just think that the higher the sample rate, the greater the resolution, therefore the better. And it just isn't true. It's completely not true at all. So my advice, if you're asking what sample rate should you record at, forget the fact that your Behringer audio interface will record at 192 kilohertz, because the UMC 404 HD costs around about 100 quid. And the fact that it records at 192 is one thing and one thing only, and it's marketing bullshit. And I know it's marketing bullshit because I've mastered music no, actually I haven't. I've been asked to master music for some very high-end streaming services that stream albums for audio files at 192 kilohertz. And in this particular case, I define an audio file as someone who has more money than sense. That's not true for all audiophiles, but there are a lot of audiophiles who have a lot more money than sense and pay a ridiculous amount of money per month to be able to stream these high-res 192 kilohertz audio files. Now the files the label sent me were straight off the CD at 16-bit 44.1. So I'm getting 44.1 kilohertz audio files, which I have to remaster, and these are already mastered, so I haven't even got the pre-mastered, I haven't even got the unmastered mixes. I've got the music that's already been mastered for CD. I've then got to remaster it, convert it up to 192 kilohertz, and they're then selling it to people for a lot of money as a super high-res thing, and the audio files that are listening to it will go, well, it sound, you can hear the difference between the original CD and the remastered files at 192 kilohertz. And like, yes, you can, but the reason you can is because someone's remastered it. So that's why it sounds different. It's nothing to do with the sample rate. 192 kilohertz audio is just bollocks. It really is, and I'm going to do a whole video on why that is and why I don't believe you should record it anything above 48 kilohertz. There's absolutely no point whatsoever. There's a technical argument that certain types of plugins, non-linear plugins like compressors and anything that adds some saturation or something like that, need to run at a higher sample rate. And that's true, but they do anyway. They have oversampling in them that oversamples the audio that's coming in order for them to do their thing, and then downsamples it again when the audio comes out, which is one of the reasons why you get latency when you're using a lot of plugins. But the technology, the plugin technology, it deals with that problem now. So if you're running any plugins that are newer than 15 years old, that's just stick with 48. All you're going to do at 192 is just use up a load more hard drive space. Your computer's going to run 4 times slower as it, it's kind of straight. It's like the difference between editing HD video and trying to edit 8K video. You need a much more powerful machine to edit 8K video, and is it worth it in the long run? It's a different thing. But in terms of audio, an audio sample doesn't work like it's not like in film or video. 25 frames per second, it basically equates to 25 photos per second. So this camera I'm speaking into now is recording at 25 frames per second. So 25 times a second, that is taking a photo of me. If I record at 50 frames per second, then that's twice the information. It's twice as good. You're seeing less motion blur, so technically it's better. But artistically, is it better. That's the, but you know, technically it is. In terms of audio, it's completely different. If I'm recording at 48 kilohertz and then I record that same thing again at 96 kilohertz, I'm not getting twice the resolution. I'm not getting twice as good. It doesn't work like that, and I'm going to do a whole video that kind of explains that. So sorry if that was a bit of a waffly answer and hasn't really answered your question at all. Well, your question was, what sample rate should I record at? Record at 24-bit 48k. If you're only ever releasing music on CD, then record at 24-bit 44.1k. The reason you should record at 24-bit, even though you'll be playing back at 16-bit, is that 24-bit gives you more dynamic range, so you've got more headroom to play with when you're recording. But if your music's going out for general digital release, then record at 24-bit 48k, and don't worry about higher sample rates. Don't worry about the fact that you can't hear any difference between 44.1 and 192. You won't. And if you do, it's not better, it's actually worse. The converters are adding aliasing effects that are being moved down into the audible range, and there's lots of technical stuff going on. So I'll do an entire video explaining that, but basically record at 24-bit 48 kilohertz and don't worry about it. That's my advice on there. Thanks for your question, Adrian. Let's move on to Christian Gabello, who asks, what are the best microphones for a beginner like me to buy? I'm going to be recording acoustic guitar and vocal, ideally at the same time, and have a budget of around £200. Well, Christian, you are a lucky man, because a budget of £200 in 2020 will get you some great microphones. When I was, you know, in my teens and just getting into recording and stuff like that, if I wanted a large diaphragm condenser, it was 4 figures. That there weren't any budget friendly microphones. It was a Neumann U87 or nothing, and then, you know, or an AKG 414 or something like that, and you were well into 4-figure territory. These days you're really lucky. There's a plethora of microphones available on the market, and most of them, if you go with a reputable brand, buy something from a reputable music store and avoid eBay and Amazon and a lot of the kind of Chinese sellers that are doing Xing Tong Tangto microphones or something like that, where you don't know how, you know, they might have got loads of reviews on there, but they've got reviews of people that have bought them for their kids or something to hammer nails in or something like that. Go with a reputable brand. And really, with 200 quid, you're going to do all right. If you're recording, what are we recording? Recording acoustic guitar and vocal, ideally at the same time. So my advice would be go for an SM58, Shure SM58 for your vocal. Again, make sure you go to a reputable dealer, because there are a lot of fake Shure SM58s around and they don't sound good. The whole Shure range has been faked. SM57s, SM58s, Beta 87s. There's a lot of fake Shure microphones out there, so make sure you go to a reputable dealer who will have bought them from Shure and can guarantee that, you know, they're going to be real, genuine microphones. That would be my advice for the vocal. For the guitar, I'd go with the Rode NT1A, because I love it. It's a great microphone. It'll give you lots of sparkle from your guitar, and it'll pick up, you know, great low end as well. It'll give you a nice warm low end, a nice bright airy top end without overcooking it too much. The Rode NT1A is a great choice for, you know, the price. So you can pick up a Rode NT1A for about £120 and an SM58 for about 100 quid. So that's kind of around the, you know, you might be able to haggle if you're buying both microphones from a shop and get the two for 200 quid. But 200 quid will get you a Shure SM58 and a Rode NT1A fairly easily. And they're great microphones. Not only are they great microphones for you now if you're just starting out, but they're 2 microphones that can be with you for your entire career. So in 20 years time, you'll still be using the SM58, you'll still be using the Rode NT1A. If you don't want to go for the NT1A, go for something like an Audio-Technica AT2020. You know, anything from a reputable brand at around about that price is actually going to sound pretty good. So that would be my advice. 58 on your vocal, Rode NT1A on the guitar. Get the 58 nice and close to your mouth, because then you'll get a bit of proximity effect in your voice. So proximity effect is a slight bass boost. When you get close into a cardioid microphone, it tends to lift the bass end up a little bit, so that will make your voice sound nice and kind of thick and full. And the NT1A, experiment with positioning on the guitar. If there's someone else in the house, get them to move the microphone around, put a pair of headphones on. If you've got some closed back headphones that will isolate the outside world, so you just hear, you know, what's being recorded, then great. Listen on headphones, get someone to move the microphone around, different positions on the guitar, and when it sounds great, then stop and make a note of that position and use that. Try and avoid putting the microphone directly in front of the sound hole. I haven't got an acoustic guitar here. Well, I have, but I don't know where it is, so I can't show you. But try and avoid putting the microphone directly in front of the sound hole, because you can get quite a bit of boom coming out of that. I'd probably go, if you're using one mic on acoustic guitar, somewhere between the sound hole and kind of where the fretboard meets the body, somewhere around there. If you aim for that sort of position, you'll get lots of high-end sparkle from the fretboard and the actual strings, but you'll also pick up a nice warm low end from the body of the guitar as well. So aim for a position somewhere around where wood meets wood on the guitar, where the neck meets the body, and you probably can't go far wrong with that. 58 on your vocal, bang, you're sorted. Hope that helps. Thanks very much, Christian, for asking that. Next question from Danny Dewan. Danny says, I'm struggling to judge the bass end in my mixes. I'm in a small 8 by 8 rented room. Ooh. So can't put up any acoustic treatment. I'm running Logic Pro and Yamaha HS5 monitors. Any tips on how I can better judge the bass end? 8 by 8 room. Danny, you need to move. That's probably the work, because the ceiling's going to be about 8 foot as well. So, and the worst room you can mix in or record in is a cube, because of standing waves and room modes and comb filtering and all the horrible things that happens when a sound wave reflects off a wall, reflects off another wall, and then meets itself. So 8 by 8 is the worst. Sorry to break the bad news. Well, you probably knew that anyway, because you don't know what your bass end's doing. So top tips, you're using Logic Pro. So there's a little trick I'll show you on Logic Pro. But the first two things are, check your mix on headphones. So if you're using HS5s go down to, I think, about 55 hertz. That's kind of as low as they go. And generally there's quite a lot going on below 55 hertz in most music, especially if it's got drums in it or bass guitar or anything like that. So you need to know what that's doing. So one thing you have done is you've actually chosen a pretty good pair of monitors for your room, because the last thing you want to do in an 8 by 8 room is have some monitors like these ones, like the ones I'm using here, in the wall, because you're just going to get bass everywhere and it's going to be a total nightmare. So you've chosen a pretty good set of monitors. The smaller the room, the smaller your monitors want to be. The bigger the room, the bigger your monitors can be. But monitors that are too big in a room that's too small is not going to work. So good choice there. But obviously the HS5s aren't going to let you know what's going on below about 55 hertz. So the first thing to do is check your mix on headphones and make sure they're a good set of studio monitoring headphones. So don't buy anything from Bose or any kind of consumer or Beats or anything like that, because they've all got the smiley faced EQ curve, so as they sound great in the shop if you're demoing them. Try and get a pair of really good studio monitoring headphones from AKG or Beyerdynamic or Sennheiser or Focal or someone like that, and then really get to know them. So spend a lot of time listening on your headphones, not too loud, because headphones can be very fatiguing very, very quickly. Listen at a sensible level to tons of commercial tracks that you know really well. So reference loads of commercial tracks on the headphones. Listen in particular to the bass end and how loud or how quiet the bass end sounds. Try and listen at the same level every time. So if that means dragging some tracks into your DAW and using your faders on your DAW to monitor, try and, when you're learning a new system, or when you're learning a new pair of headphones, or you've got an existing pair of headphones that are good enough that you can get to know, then try and listen to lots of different tracks at the same level. There's no point in turning the louder tracks up to get into it and then the quieter tracks down, because you're not going to learn what the bass end is doing. It's going to be louder on the louder tracks because you're turning them up. So try and listen at the same sort of monitoring level, a good, healthy, fairly low level, to learn how the headphones deal with the bass end. So that would be my first tip. Second tip, if you're in Logic Pro, and this is a really handy one, there's a brilliant plugin in Logic Pro, which is actually I use it all the time for metering, which sounds bizarre because it's not a metering plugin at all. Let me show you what I'm talking about. In Logic Pro, I've loaded up one of Alex Grove's tracks from the mastering video we did the other day, because that was a little bit too heavy in the bass end. It just needed taming down a little bit. So Alex has probably got a similar kind of problem to you, in that he's in a room that's less than ideal for mixing music in terms of really being able to determine what the low end is doing. So let's have a little listen to the track. He says, oops, there we go, and we can hear. So for this, you really need to be listening on headphones, or in a room that isn't 8 foot by 8 foot. So this is going to be of no use to you, Danny, whatsoever. I do apologise. No, it will be of use to you, because there's a top trick you can do with Logic. So to my ears, the bass there is too much. It's just too much. But it's only too much in these bits. When we get to this section here, it's not too much. So what I don't want to do is I don't want to EQ the low end out of these sections, because if I EQ it out of these sections, that's also going to be affecting the other sections, which are fine. So I can automate the EQ, or I can chop the song up, but I don't want to do that. There's different ways. There's different ways you can do it. But in Logic, if you're in Logic Pro, which you are, now I don't know how this works in other DAWs, so I couldn't, this only applies to Logic Pro as far as I am, or it might apply to other DAWs, but I haven't tried it in other DAWs, so I don't know. So don't take this as gospel, but it does work for me in Logic Pro. And that is, if I'm not sure about any particular frequency area of a mix, be it the bass end, the low mids, the high mids, or the high end, load the multipressor, just the standard default multipressor, and leave it alone. Don't do anything with it. So go to your plugins, go to Dynamics. I mean, it's in our recent list there because I've used it, but go to Dynamics, go to multipressor, stereo, and that will load up the multipressor. Now, if I'm right about the bass end, the thing about the Logic multipressor is it's very, very well optimized for running a mix through. So basically, whilst it might not be the best multi-band compressor in the world, as something to meter your tracks with, it's actually fantastic, because it's really well optimized in terms of what it looks at in terms of level. So what I'm trying to say is, if there's too much bass in your mix, this won't work if there isn't enough, but if there's too much low end in the mix, Logic's multipressor will tell me straight away. So let's play the track. And we can already see, if you look at the left hand side of the multipressor, it's already pulling it down a few dB. And then when we kick in, so that tells me straight away that yes, it's not just, it's not my ears, it's not the room, it's not the monitors. I know the room and I know the monitors anyway, but I always like to use this to check that I haven't been listening to something else and it's clouded my judgment or whatever. But this confirms to me that yes, there is too much low end in this mix. And so I took steps to reduce the low end using multi-band compression. Not this one, because I'm not actually a great fan of how it sounds particularly. But what it is very, very good at is kind of being a bit of a judge for you. So again, if the top end's too much, it'll start to bring that down as well. If the low mids are too muddy, it'll start to bring those down. But here, as soon as you click on it, you can see straight away that it's bringing that low end down automatically. And let me just play a bit and we'll bypass it. And if you're listening on headphones or something like that, you won't, anyone listening on the phone, you won't hear it at all. But I'll bypass it a few times and you can hear the sort of before and after. So this is before, and then we bring it in. And you can hear it's just pulling that low. I don't particularly like what it's doing, and that's not what I did with Alex's track. That sounds weird, but I don't like the sound of this as a compressor, but as a metering device, it's brilliant. It's really good. So if you're using Logic Pro and you're not sure about your low end, pop the multipressor on it, the multiband compressor on it, the default stock Logic one, just in its default setting. Don't change any settings at all. Just put it on and look at what those 4 frequency areas are doing. Look at what the low's doing, look at what the low mids are doing, look at what the mids are doing, and look at what the highs are doing, and kind of use that to help make your judgment, if that makes sense. So that would be my advice for you, Danny. Check your mixes on headphones. The third thing you need to do is make sure that you get your mixes mastered by a proper mastering engineer in a proper mastering environment, in an acoustically treated room with full range accurate monitors, because any mastering engineer worth their salt will instantly be able to tell you if there's problems in the low end. It's the most common thing with mixes from people mixing at home. The most common thing is either too much bass or not enough bass. If you're hearing too much bass because your room's creating it, then you turn it down in your mix, and then your mix ends up a bit bass light. If you're sitting in the middle of the room and the bass is cancelling itself out and you're not hearing any bass, then you're boosting it in the mix to compensate. And again, it's the most common thing when I'm mastering music to have a dodgy bass end is the most common thing. So check on a decent pair of headphones. Check in the car as well. Cars are actually really great places as long as you know the system in the car. A car is a really good listening environment, which is why lots of people check their mixes in the car. It's a very well acoustically treated space because it's full up with seats and soft materials and padding on the doors and the ceiling. So acoustically it's great. They're very, very ineffective at trapping bass energy. If you know when you hear a car go past and they're playing music loudly, you can hear all the bass coming out because it's a tiny thin layer of metal that it's got to go through. So all the bass tends to leave the car really quickly and not bounce around and cloud your judgment. So listening to the car as well. A car is a really great place to check your low end. So that's my top tips for you there, Danny. I hope that helps. Next up is Tom McLean. Tom asks, what software do you use for mastering? I see you had all the tracks in Logic in your mastering video. I use a variety of bits of software. I used to use Sadie back in the day because that was about all that was available when we started moving away from tape. I've used Waveburner, which used to be part of the Logic Pro bundle, I think up until Logic 7, and then Apple ditched that, and I was gutted because I loved it. And it wouldn't run on the new machines and just kind of disappeared. That was a fantastic bit of software, sadly long gone. I've used DSP Quattro, which was okay. Now I use Studio One. The project half of Studio One for mastering is absolutely fantastic, and it ties in really nicely with this desk as a control surface as well. So when I was answering Sean's question earlier on what desk do we use, it's the PreSonus desk. It ties in great with the Studio One software as a control surface, so I can hit DAW mode and I can get all my tracks up on channels, level them really quickly, transport controls, scroll up and down. It's great. So I use Studio One, PreSonus Studio One, the project half of that. There's the song half and the project half. The project half is great for mastering, really, really good. You can put plugins on your individual songs. You can compile DDP files for CD production. The metering on it is fantastic. The LUFS metering, just all the metering on it is really, really great. It's all, you know, really configurable. It's a great piece of software for mastering. And there is a free version of Studio One as well. I'm not sure how the project section works on the free version, but download it and have a go, see how you get on. But that's generally what I use Logic sometimes as well. It depends what I'm doing. A lot of the time, if I'm going out into analog world and then coming back in again, I'll do it in Logic. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because I'm used to Logic in terms of inputs and outputs and routing and stuff, and so I can do it quicker. Maybe that's why, I don't know. But for the final sort of compilation, certainly I'll put everything into Studio One because it's really easy to export, you know, full high-res WAV files. You can export FLACs, you can MP3. The MP3 conversion in it is great, and you can create a DDP image for CD production really easily as well. So Studio One is my favorite DAW at the moment for mastering. Lots of guys using Pro Tools, lots of guys using Cubase. You can use anything really, it doesn't really matter. They all kind of do the same thing at the end of the day. It's just what you're used to. But Studio One for me has been, for the last couple of years, has been working really, really well. So thank you, Tom. Yeah, let me just explain why I use Logic in the mastering video. It's just because I was finding the most effective way to get all the tracks in front of me that I was going through in the video in one go, and I could quickly A/B between them. And the quickest way for me to do that was just to chuck everything into Logic, original mix, mastered mix, original mix, mastered mix, original, you know, all the way down. And then I just had to use the solo buttons on the desk to flick between the tracks, occasionally getting it wrong. If you've seen the video, you'll know what I mean there. But that's why that was in Logic. But generally, Studio One is my mastering DAW of choice these days. Thank you, Tom, very much for that question. Another one about mastering from Sarah Brewer. Sarah says, the Michael Boyes track she mastered sounded awesome in the low end after mastering. Thank you very much, Sarah. And I can hear something there that sounds to me like more than EQ. What did you do? You're right, and actually this is something that Michael picked up on as well. He when I sent the tracks back to him, he really loved the low end. He said that I'd done something to the low end which made it sound analog. It sounded warm and thick and full and fat. And yes, you're right. It is. Yeah, you say it sounds to me more. Sorry, I can hear something there that sounds to me like more than EQ. And yes, you're right. It's got some. One of the things I did with Michael's tracks, which I do with some tracks, not all tracks, all mastering is different depending on what you're presented with and depending on what the artist wants as well. What I did with Michael's tracks was I ran them through some analog mojo. So I've got some great EQ and old BBC stuff here, some Gromis things which are sort of American broadcast devices from sort of the 1970s, I think, and there's some really, particularly in the BBC stuff, there's some really great transformers in there that just do something nice to the low end. I can't even begin to describe what it is. There's that famous quote that says, talking about audio is like dancing about architecture, and it's kind of true. I just can't explain what it does, but it just does something nice to the sound, particularly in the low ends. You can control it by driving it in a certain way. The harder you drive it, the kind of more bloom you get until you start going into distortion, and then it all sort of falls to bits quite quickly. But getting that, and because Michael's tracks were so well mixed, they were so evenly balanced, I could drive those transformers really nicely to just do something nice to the low end. So that's basically what I did, and that's why it sounds full and rich. It's about choosing your hardware when you're using hardware, and choosing what's, I mean, you can do it in software as well. You can do it entirely in the box these days. You can do it all with plugins. There's some great plugins. The one thing I often use for bass end is the tape simulation from Slate. If I think the bass end needs something more, but it's not necessarily EQ, if it just needs that nice thing to go on, quite often I'll try the Slate tape simulation, because that kind of does the same thing that sort of this stuff does. It just gives it a nice, cuddly, warm, lush kind of sound. It can be a bit it can be a bit harsh. Not harsh, harsh is the wrong word. It can be a bit over the top sometimes with the plugin simulation, because a lot of the plugins try and go sort of me like that, you know. They're sometimes they're a bit more colourful, a bit more characterful than the analog counterpart, because most of the analog gear that we were using back in the day was trying to be as neutral as possible. So a lot of the time the plugins sort of overemphasize the niceties, and it can be quite easy to pile stuff on and just get everything sounding just too much. It just sounds too much. But yeah, that's what I did. That's what I did with the bass end on Michael's tracks. There were a couple of tracks as well. I think one of the ones that I demoed on the video, I can't remember. I'll have to find it and load it up. But another thing I'll quite often do is I might, if I need to tighten up the low end a bit, or just I'll play around with sort of boosting the low end slightly using EQ, and then bringing it down again using a multi-band compressor, which can kind of tighten it up. And there's lots of tricks you can do like that. But in the case of Michael's tracks, it just went through some analog mojo. Simple as that. So I hope that helps, Sarah. Thanks very much for your question. Next, this is the last one, so sorry if this video's been a bit of a long one, but we're getting there now. Mike Moretti says, can you do a video please on small audio interfaces? What do you think of the audience stuff? Yes, Mike, we're going to do a video on small audio interfaces, and we're actually researching put my teeth back in. We're actually researching small audio interfaces quite firmly at the moment, because James has broken his Focusrite Scarlett USB interface that he's been using at home, and it's just putting out mush. It's just clipping and going you're just getting static and funny noises out of it. So that somehow has been fried. So James needs, while we're in isolation, James is working at home, I'm working sort of 3/4 at home and then coming in here to do the critical stuff. So I've been in doing some more mastering today and thought I might as well crack out another video while I'm here. But yeah, so James needs a little USB or similar audio interface at the moment for home use. So we're researching those, and we'll give you a sort of rundown on our findings. What do you think of the audience stuff? I love the audience stuff. I love Focusrite. I've always loved Focusrite. There's always something great about Focusrite, and I love the audience stuff as well, probably equally. Whenever I've heard an Audient interface, I've always thought, yeah, that's great. Audient kind of evolved from DDA. So DDA were a company run by a gentleman called David Dearden, and DDA stands for Dave Dearden Associates, back in the 80s. And I had a DDA desk. I had an enormous DDA desk. It was a DCM 232, enormous thing. It was, honestly, it was so big you could land a plane on it. It was absolutely enormous. It used every time you turned it on, all the lights dimmed because it used so much electricity. There was a patch bay, was like a 64 unit standalone rack, and that had the power supplies in it. It originally belonged to Psalm Studios, and you fired up the automation computer and you'd get loads of Tina Turner albums come up, and all the early Seal stuff, Crazy and all that all that came up on the automation computer when you turned it on. So it was a desk with some history. Enormous great thing, and it sounded fantastic. It just sounded absolutely fantastic. And DDA made huge desks for, you know, big clients like that, and they made some smaller stuff for the sort of consumer market, and they made a few live desks as well when everything was analog. And they're a vastly underrated desk. If you can pick up a second-hand DDA desk, if you want an analog mixer, then a second-hand DDA desk is going to be great. It's going to be reliable. It's going to sound fantastic. They made really good stuff. They're very underrated. Everyone, you know, looks for Neves and APIs and Tridents and stuff like that. But the DDA stuff is such good value for money secondhand. It really is. Along with Soundtracks, they're another mixer manufacturer from the 80s and 90s that I really love. In our previous studio, we had a Soundtracks Jade S, which was actually one of the last ones they ever made, dated from around about 1996, I think. And again, that sounded fantastic. It was super clean, super quiet. You could push it a little bit and get a bit of mojo out of it if you wanted to. The mic preamps were fantastic. The EQ was fantastic. Really great stuff. But DDA, so when DDA kind of shut down, whenever it was, Dave did and sort of turned that into Audient, and they started making the ASP series of mixing desks, which very, very quickly found homes in studios all around the world, and quite rightly so, because they're fantastic. They just sound absolutely great. And then Dave just started designing audio interfaces, and then the whole Audient thing kind of blossomed from that, and now they're one of the major interface manufacturers. So what do I think of the Audient stuff? I think it's fantastic. I think it's absolutely great. I've always loved Dave's stuff. Back in the DDA days, he was making some fantastic gear, and he's making some absolutely fantastic gear today as well. Another great UK company like Focusrite, very firm kind of heritage in the UK. I love British gear. I just really love it. I think it's got its own kind of mojo to it. But yeah, Audient are knocking it out of the park. They're great, absolutely great. So I think James is probably going to end up with an ID4 or something like that. But I'll do a bit of research, and it'll be interesting to compare the Audient with the Focusrite and see if there's any real difference. I think the difference in terms of audio quality is going to be tiny, but you should really pick an interface these days. They all sound great, so you should really pick an interface these days based on the technical specifications and what you need it to do. How many mic inputs do you need? Do you need a high impedance instrument, guitar input? How many outputs do you need? It should really, how do you connect it to the computer? Are you going to go USB, USB-C, Thunderbolt? What are you going to use to connect it to your computer? That's the main considerations when you're picking an interface, I think, these days, because they all sound pretty great. Not sure about Adrian's Behringer. I still can't believe you can buy a 192 kilohertz interface, 4-channel interface for £100. That's mental. That's actually quite disturbing. But anyway, no, the Audient stuff's great. So thanks, Mike, very much for your question. So, I've rabbited on again for far too long in this video. And so I apologise for that. But hopefully that's answered your questions. If you've got any more questions, please get in touch. Leave it in the comments below. Send us a message. Send us a carrier pigeon, smoke signals, however you want to do it. Do it somehow. Find a way, and we'll do our very best to answer them. So watch out for a couple of videos that we mentioned here coming out. We're going to do one on sample rates and try and demystify all of that for you. We're going to do the one that Mark suggested on how to make sort of home production sound more realistic, more like real instruments. And I'll do one on an in-depth sort of deep dive into mastering some tracks as well, and show you each kind of step of the process. And we've got tons of stuff coming up, so stay tuned. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and thanks very much for watching. We will see you very soon in the next video. Take care, stay healthy and stay safe, and stay at home. Cheers, bye bye.